Did we ever have sharks in the Coliseum? Well, we will let you know on this episode.
We get some rum and beer, expensive port in a reindeer, so you know we're gonna party.
Welcome back, Marine Conservation Happy Hour crew. This is Dr. Scarlett Smash, and I'm here with Dr. Craken. And Dr. Craken, there was a movie that just recently came out with sharks in the Coliseum. I'm fascinated, and I want to know if it did happen and what kind of shark.
So what we're talking about here is the new trailer for Gladiator 2. So there's a sequel, and in the trailer you see a scene of the Colosseum in Rome being flooded, and then sharks leaping at gladiators that fall in the water and chomping them up. And I actually got a call from one of my friends in the UK who writes for the BBC asking, is this true?
Is this true?
Is this true? Did they actually do it?
Yeah, I want to know, how did they flood the Coliseum?
Well, actually, that is completely true, because they did occasionally flood the Colosseum and other arenas for realsies. And they had a special type of gladiatorial combat where they would have boats floating, and then they would have these sort of recreations of naval battles. And what they used to do, they had this sort of system of pipeworks. They will connect to the aqueduct, which was bringing fresh water in from the sort of mountains and so on outside of Rome. So they're basically plugged into the waterworks system, and then they flooded the Colosseum.
Oh, so this was like public water. This is not like a river or anything like that they would flood.
The aqueducts would connect to rivers and things like
rivers.
that.
Okay.
You know, it's far enough outside the city so the water was nice and clean, and it would go to fountains and so on. But they would connect in and then will basically flood the Colosseum. So that did actually happen. Eventually, they started doing these naval battles in artificial lakes that were built outside the city. And so you would go...
Which would be easier, right?
Yeah, a little bit easier. So it would be there all the time, and it'd be a bit less of a hassle, less leaks and so forth. And then they had these sort of, kind of like recreational lakes, kind of like where you have reservoirs now where you go out boating and so on. But they would have these.
But lakes and rivers don't have sharks.
Yes. So that's the thing. They did actually put sharks in these naval battles, because Rome is actually not very far away from the sea. There's a river connecting Rome to ports. There's a big port in Ostia, which is very close by. And of course, there are lots of different sharks in the Mediterranean. And on the coast, you've got blacktip sharks, you've got gray nurse sharks and so on. You even have great whites out in deeper waters, and probably the most predatory shark there that you're most likely to encounter would be a blue shark, but they tend to be in deeper water. And it looks like what they were doing were just catching sharks nearby.
Mm-hmm.
And, in Roman times, there were a lot more sharks about than there are today, because, you didn't have all this huge amount of shark bycatch killing all the sharks.
So we don't have record of which types of sharks they caught? Because like my first thought is, they got the laziest sharks or the slowest sharks, like nurse sharks.
They probably got nurse sharks, quite frankly, because they would have been,
which is a
they
bummer.
would have been coastal, they would have been in lagoons. They would probably grab them and then really quickly transport them to Rome, dump them in the Colosseum. But they would have been like, I guess, window dressing. So as you're looking down from the stands, you'd see these sharks swimming around. But, nurse sharks aren't very dangerous unless you try to wrestle them or something. So they're really more like decorations than anything else. And because they're using fresh water, they wouldn't have survived very long.
For very long, I know. How many hours do you think it was? Or do you think they actually made it even a day?
Yeah, they probably didn't even make it a day, unless they were sharks that are adapted to estuarine waters where they maybe can have a little bit of brackish water they could throw a bunch of salt in, but salt was really expensive. So that's not the sort of thing you would use. In fact, the term salary comes from the word salt, because soldiers used to be paid in salt. It was quite valuable. So so yeah, you're not going to literally like throw gold into the water just so you can have sharks. Now, bull sharks could be okay in fresh water, but the nearest bull sharks are like the Red Sea or Morocco.
Yeah, so that was probably not happening.
There were definitely Roman colonies in areas where bull sharks are, and they definitely had arenas. So they could technically have got bull sharks and then used them in like the outer colonies. So down in Mauritania, or so on the banks of the Red Sea or something like that. They could have used bull sharks. Maybe if they were really, really lucky, they could have transported one, but I don't really see them being able to
Oh,
stick a bull
there's
shark
no
in
way.
a
Yeah.
tank.
And not only that, but the transporting, that's what I was thinking. They
Yeah.
must have collected so many sharks, and most of them died on the way to the Colosseum, to the freshwater, which they can't even live in. I mean, Jesus. I mean, it was almost like suffocation for them this entire time, like hours of suffocation.
Yeah, they would have taken huge numbers. In fact, that's a big issue for diversity in the Roman era. A lot of species became locally extinct because they were taking so many of them for these animal games and for people's personal zoos. You know, they became
Awful.
quite popular, and they would just die in droves
Yeah,
during
right.
the transport.
So they weren't wrestling them. They were actually just watching them swim around and die.
Yeah, they would have been just sort of tootling
Okay.
around, tootling around the boats while the gladiators were doing their naval battle, and they're literally kind of decorations. I mean, even today, with the big predatory sharks like a great white, they do not do very well when they're being transported for aquariums in with the sort of the latest technology. So there's no way they're really gonna do that with a great white, and they don't have tiger sharks in the Mediterranean. So yeah, it will just be like these little coastal sort of lagoon reef sharks, probably nurse sharks, and just to make it look scary,
Oh my
because
God.
the locals wouldn't know any difference. But they did have killer whales in these combats. And very famously, one of the first records of killer whales is in a book by Pliny the Elder, who writes about how they had a group of killer whales in Ostia, which is a port city very close to Rome, where they would have been collecting all these sharks and things. And they sort of netted them off, and they had a gladiatorial combat with the killer whales in Ostia, and they probably carried on doing that, capturing them, transporting them, and using killer whales in these
Oh, that's
combats.
insane. Killer whales are incredibly heavy. How did they pull them out of the water back then and transported them?
Absolutely. I mean, when you basically have lots and lots of people, so that's probably what they did. They sort of put them on carts and so forth, or put them on boats, probably. Put
Jeez.
them on boats and transported them from the Italian coast into the Colosseum or into these
Oh my
artificial lakes
God.
outside of Rome. Or, I mean, a lot of places had these arenas. There's several of them that they found in the UK, for example. Anywhere that had a big city would have a gladiatorial arena. And apparently they did take killer whales quite frequently. They would have survived at least for a while, probably not more than a couple of days or a couple of weeks, if that,
Oh.
but they would have been a bit more robust than the
Yeah,
sharks.
but
So,
weren't they attacking them or no?
well, even today, obviously they transport killer whales, and occasionally the killer whales do have a tendency to attract and occasionally kill orca trainers. So you can imagine it's going to be even worse
Yeah,
back then.
absolutely. Yeah.
But one of the first names for killer whales was Orca Gladiator. And apparently it's a link back to this orcas being used as gladiators in the arena. So the gladiator fish, so to speak.
Oh,
But yeah, so killer whales definitely, and a whole bunch of other species. Crocodiles, they use
crocodiles
frequently.
in the Colosseum.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Where did they get those?
Oh, places like Egypt. They have
Oh
the
my gosh, they
big,
transported them from Egypt.
yeah, big River Nile crocodiles, and those would be a bit
Wow.
more robust because you've got gators where you are. In fact, in Tampa, there's gators sort of swimming around flooded parts of Tampa.
Yeah.
But they could have taken crocodiles and they would have survived, and they put
Oh,
them
those
in the
crocodiles
arena.
would definitely survive, and then that's definitely a more competitor to fight with.
And there's some suggestion that some of the tales of Christian saints and dragons might be related to crocodiles
That makes sense.
that were imported. So there's tales in Slovenia, for example, of St. George going to find a dragon in the swamps around Slovenia. And absolutely, there could have been crocodiles there, either naturally or they could have been released by the Romans into the wild, kind of like your Florida pythons, and they would have probably done relatively well. But some of these ancient stories of dragons might actually be linked to these crocodiles that they were importing for gladiatorial combat.
Oh yeah. If I was back in the day, I would consider a crocodile from Egypt a dragon.
Oh, absolutely. Particularly if you're like some sort of barbarian from Germany.
Yeah, exactly.
Or something like that. What the heck is this?
I know, and
Clearly
most of the population there has never been to Egypt, so they think this is probably a very exotic place with their dragons that they're bringing into the Colosseum. This is very interesting. Makes sense. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, so that's probably something. I mean, they used to have all sorts of things. They used to have gorillas, apparently.
Oh, poor gorillas.
They used to have
mean.
Giraffes, of all things, in the gladiatorial combat, but they really depleted the European lion. One of the reasons European lion went extinct was because they caught so many of them. But a lot of these species from northern Africa, there was a really, really busy trade of animals into the various different arenas. And as I said, there's arenas throughout the Roman Empire. They were even importing them into the UK at times as well. So it was really quite a big thing. But Ridley Scott actually got some of the stuff right in this latest trailer for Gladiator. They did flood the Colosseum. They did have naval battles. They did have sharks, but those sharks wouldn't have been attacking the gladiators, probably. It'd be like watching, big dogfish swimming around the boats. They should have gone with the crocodiles. Yeah, in my opinion,
probably easier. Yeah.
They should have gone with the crocodiles.
Kraken, you just said something that blew my mind. Did you say that there were lions? What did you say? There are lions in Europe?
Yes, yeah. There used to be European lions. So
what? What did they look like?
Like African lions, apparently.
African lions lived in Europe.
Yeah. They had a type of lion that lived in Europe, and I think from the pictures that I've seen, it looks like they had less of a mane.
Okay, yeah.
So they looked more like a
female. Like they look like female lions.
Yes, exactly. They look more like a female lion, or they looked like a puma that had played rugby.
Oh, wow.
With like a sort of bigger neck. But they absolutely had European lions and a whole bunch of other wild
When did
species.
they go extinct?
Oh, I have to look up the exact dates, but yeah, it was
wild.
They had them into the Roman era and then sort of disappeared round about then.
Oh, that's so sad. I wonder, the fact that they were basically hunted out, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, they hunted them out, and a lot of the bears as well. They often took bears for these gladiatorial combats.
Oh.
Particularly the sort of large brown bears, and they would take the smaller bears as well for the zoos.
So destructive. What a destructive recreational entertainment.
Oh, absolutely. They killed thousands of animals. And there are records in, sometimes when a new emperor came in to entertain the masses,
Oh,
they would put on these huge games that would last for like 100 days that were free to the locals in Rome. And then they would have a whole bunch of animal acts. Very often it was in the morning, you would have the animal acts, and then you would have the gladiators attacking each other in the afternoons. But they would often have these animal acts in the morning, and they talk about thousands of animals dying during that, but the number of animals who died being transported
oh, I know. Yeah.
before they got, actually into the
Coliseum.
arena.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they have in the trailer actually a rhino. So they did have rhinos, although they didn't have people riding the rhinos, which would be incredibly dangerous. But they certainly had rhinos in the Colosseum. They very often had lions, as I said. Hippopotamuses. It sounds like they had those as well. Those would have been incredibly dangerous. But a whole bunch of wild species, wolves. Yeah, they really did decimate those big animal populations during the Roman era. So they had a massive impact on biodiversity, which people often don't think about when they think about biodiversity of Europe. They think, oh, there's hardly any big animals there. But there used to be. There used to be
a lot of
lots.
diversity.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And they also had an impact on some of the marine species, we said, the killer whales and monk seals. They would hunt monk seals as well. So yeah, really, really big impact on these poor animals. But Ridley Scott got a lot of that right. But as I said, I would have gone with the crocodiles instead of the sharks. It'd be a bit more historically accurate.
Well, this has been fascinating. I've learned so much. So thanks, Dr. Craken, for being here and telling us about all the dead animals. Thanks, Dr. Craken.
Gladiators, all the gladiators.
All right. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for being part of the Marine Conservation Happy Hour crew.
Hey, Marine Conservation Happy Hour crew. Don't forget to hit subscribe and follow us for future episodes. And also, refer us. We'd love it. We would also like to hear from you, so please contact us on social media, or you can email us about a topic that you're interested in hearing about. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, or you would like us to come visit your science facility and do a live episode, email us at info@absolutelysmashingllc.com. This podcast was edited and produced by Absolutely Smashing. The music is produced by Jolly Shore Leave. Thank you again for listening, and we couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much for being part of the Marine Conservation Happy Hour crew.